His pen hovered above the billion-dollar contract when a terrified voice shattered the silence. "Sir, stop." And the world's most powerful man froze at the words of a maid. For a heartbeat, everything in the Park Global Tower stopped. The city stretched beneath the 39th floor windows, glittering in the gray Chicago morning, but inside the boardroom no one dared breathe. Assistants froze. Lawyers exchanged glances. The only sound was the hum of fluorescent light. At the head of the table stood June Park, immaculate suit, steady hand, reputation of steel. The man who never made mistakes. His signature alone could move markets. And yet, with that single cry, the pen trembled between his fingers. He turned toward the doorway. A woman in a black housekeeping uniform stood there, chest heaving, one sheet of paper clutched to her heart. Danielle Hayes, the maid who emptied trash cans before sunrise, met his eyes, terrified but unflinching. "Repeat that," June said, his voice a low warning. Danielle swallowed. "Sir, the numbers on page 12, they don't match the summary. Someone made a mistake." Murmurs rippled around the table. The lead attorney cleared his throat. "Mr. Park, perhaps." Silence. June didn't raise his tone, but it sliced through the room. He studied her, nervous stance, uniform stiff with starch, knuckles white around the page. The idea that she had found an error in a document his own analysts had built felt impossible, and insulting. Still, curiosity tugged at him. "Everyone out," he ordered. When the last door clicked shut, the room felt too large, too quiet. "How did you even see this?" he asked. "I was cleaning your conference table last night. You left a copy open." "I wasn't snooping." Her voice trembled, then steadied. "Numbers jump out at me. My mom taught me bookkeeping before she got sick." June frowned, took the folder, and scanned the page. The decimal was off, 2 places. Billions gone. His stomach dropped. The pen fell from his hand and hit the marble floor with a sharp click. "I'm sorry," Danielle whispered. "I just thought you should know before you signed." He looked up. For the first time in years, gratitude and humiliation warred behind his composed mask. "Do you realize what you just did?" "I might have overstepped," she said softly. "But I couldn't stay quiet." Outside, flakes of snow floated past the window, glinting like fragments of glass. Inside, a billionaire and a maid stood frozen in the same fragile silence. 12 hours earlier. The L train screamed across the steel tracks as Danielle hurried beneath it, breath fogging in the cold. Her coffee was already lukewarm, her gloves thin. Another 12-hour day ahead. Her younger brother Michael's inhaler had broken again, and rent was due in 3 days. She pushed through the revolving doors of Park Global, smiling at the sleepy security guard. The lobby gleamed like polished ice. Most people didn't notice her. Those who did handed her trash without looking. That was fine. She noticed everything. Numbers comforted her, order in chaos. Maybe that's why, the night before, the open folder on the CEO's desk had caught her eye. A single wrong digit. Such a tiny thing. Such a dangerous thing. For hours she'd argued with herself. People like her didn't interrupt men like him. But her mother's words echoed in her mind. Right is right, even when it costs you. So when she saw him lift his pen that morning, something inside her leapt before fear could stop it. Back in the boardroom, June paced by the window. "You could have ruined this entire acquisition," he said. "I thought I saved it." He turned, startled by her calm. "You don't understand how this world works." "Maybe not your world," she said, voice steady now, "but numbers don't lie." Her courage stung him more than her accusation. He snapped the folder shut. "What's your name?" "Danielle Hayes." "Danielle," he repeated it, testing the sound. "You'll hear from my office." She nodded and backed away, pulse racing. As the elevator doors closed, she whispered a quick prayer that she hadn't just ended her job. Still, beneath the fear was a strange peace, the kind that comes only after doing what's right. That night, rain streaked the penthouse windows. June sat alone, the contract open before him. For years he'd chased perfection, terrified of failure after watching his father lose everything. Trust no one, he'd learned. Feel nothing. But today, a maid had cared more about his future than the men paid to protect it. He traced the corrected numbers with his finger. It wasn't only the deal that had been saved, it was something in him he hadn't realized was missing. Outside, the rain turned to snow again, and for the first time in a long while, June Park let the silence feel human. The next morning, the air inside Park Global felt heavier. Rumors had already begun to ripple through the building. The maid had interrupted Mr. Park's signing. No one dared ask questions out loud, but whispers followed Danielle everywhere she went. The cleaning crew avoided eye contact. Even the receptionist, who used to greet her kindly, looked away. Still, Danielle held her head high. She reminded herself that telling the truth mattered more than being liked. But deep down, she was terrified. Every time her phone buzzed, she half expected a call telling her she'd been fired. By noon, that call came. "Mr. Park wants to see you," said a voice from the executive floor. Her knees went weak. She smoothed her uniform and rode the private elevator, hands clasped tight. The carpet smelled of cologne and fresh lilies. It was too quiet. When the doors opened, June Park stood by the window, jacket off, sleeves rolled, eyes unreadable. "Sit," he said. Danielle perched on the edge of a leather chair. "I checked your numbers," June began. "You were right. If I had signed that contract, we would have lost almost $2 billion. Danielle blinked. I'm glad you caught it, sir." His tone sharpened. "Don't mistake this for praise. What you did was reckless." Her fingers tightened on her lap. "Would you rather I'd stayed quiet?" That question hung in the air. For the first time, he didn't have an answer. He finally exhaled and leaned against the desk. "You could have come to me privately. You embarrassed my entire board." "I didn't think I'd get the chance if I waited," Danielle said softly. "I did what I thought was right." Her honesty disarmed him again. Every word scraped against the walls he'd built around himself. He wanted to be angry, but all he could feel was respect. June ran a hand through his hair. "Do you realize that one act may have just exposed corruption inside my company?" Danielle's eyes widened. "Corruption?" He nodded, face tightening. "Someone manipulated those numbers. I just don't know who yet." A long silence followed. The only sound was the soft ticking of the wall clock. Finally, June said quietly, "Most people in this building would have seen that mistake and stayed silent. Why didn't you?" Danielle hesitated. "My mom used to say, if you can stop someone from falling, even if they never thank you, do it anyway." He stared at her for a moment, then turned back to the window. The city sprawled below, gray and endless. "You can go," he said. "And thank you." She stood. "You're welcome, sir." That night, Danielle's small apartment glowed with lamplight and the smell of chicken soup. Her brother Michael sat on the couch doing homework, his breathing steady. "How was work?" he asked. Danielle smiled faintly. "Complicated." He grinned. "You? Always the superhero." She laughed, but her chest ached. "Not sure he'd call me that." "Who?" "Mr. Park." Michael's eyes widened. "The billionaire guy. You actually talked to him." "More like survived him," she said, setting a bowl in front of him. "But yeah." She didn't tell him the details. She didn't want to worry him about her job. Instead, she watched the steam curl up from the bowl and thought about June's eyes, sharp, searching, tired. For a man who had everything, he looked lonely. Up in his penthouse, June couldn't sleep. He kept seeing Danielle's face, that mixture of fear and conviction. It reminded him of his mother when she used to work double shifts at their family store in Busan. She'd once told him, "Integrity is expensive, but you never regret paying for it." He hadn't thought about that in years. Now he was thinking about it too much. He walked to his desk, scrolling through internal emails. A name appeared again and again in the reports: Vice President Adam Roth. The same man who had pushed him to sign quickly. June's chest tightened. Danielle hadn't just saved him money, she had exposed betrayal. For a man who'd spent his whole life believing kindness was weakness, this realization cracked something deep inside. The next morning, the staff cafeteria buzzed. Danielle arrived for her shift, surprised when the room went silent. Someone had printed an online article about the acquisition delay, Park Global halts deal over accounting error. Her heart sank. Then a voice behind her, "Impressive work, Ms. Hayes." She turned. It was June Park himself, standing in the doorway, coffee in hand. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. "I'd like you to help me review a few documents," he said calmly. "Since you seem to have an eye for numbers." The entire cafeteria stared. Danielle froze. "Me? Yes, you. Come to my office at 3. He left as quietly as he came, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. For the first time in her life, Danielle felt something unfamiliar stir inside her: pride. Would you risk your job to tell the truth if you knew it could change everything? Comment below. I'm curious who among you would speak up, even when it's scary. If stories like this remind you that honesty still matters, don't just scroll past. Subscribe. It's not about a button, it's about believing integrity still counts. That afternoon, as Danielle rode the elevator up again, her hands shook, not from fear this time, but from purpose. Somewhere deep down, she felt a spark. Maybe she wasn't invisible after all. And somewhere high above, June Park was realizing that for all his power, the truest thing in his empire had come from the only person brave enough to speak. The next few days blurred into a quiet storm. Danielle did as she was told, reporting to June Park's office each morning, but the shift in her world was impossible to ignore. 1 week ago, she'd been polishing silver handles and emptying wastebaskets. Now she was sitting at a polished mahogany desk beside the billionaire himself, reviewing transaction ledgers line by line. The problem wasn't the work, it was the stares. People didn't whisper anymore, they glared. A maid didn't belong beside a CEO. The HR manager accidentally forgot to send her lunch break schedule. 2 executives bumped into her in the hall, papers spilling everywhere. Not one of them stopped to help. She kept her head down. Pride couldn't feed her brother, and truth couldn't pay rent, not yet. June noticed, though he said nothing. Every morning, she arrived 5 minutes early, her hands still raw from her morning cleaning shift, her notebook neatly folded open. She was meticulous, quiet, and quick. But what unsettled him most wasn't her precision, it was her kindness. One afternoon, she walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you might like one," she said, setting it gently beside his computer. He didn't look up. "I don't drink coffee during work hours." "I noticed," she said with a half-smile, "but you haven't eaten all day either." Her voice was calm, not defiant, just observant. He didn't respond, but when she left the room, he drank it anyway. By Wednesday, tension snapped. Mr. Park, his vice president, Adam Roth, began during a strategy meeting, "We need to address the optics of you," consulting the cleaning staff. June's pen froze mid-note. "Explain." "It's undermining authority," Adam continued, tone smooth, polite, poisonous. "Investors don't want to see you distracted by unnecessary personnel. It sends the wrong message." June's eyes lifted slowly. "You mean it sends your message?" A ripple of unease passed through the room. When the meeting ended, June found Danielle waiting outside with another set of spreadsheets. She didn't ask what had happened, she could see it on his face. "They don't like me being here," she said quietly. "They don't like being reminded they missed what you found," he replied. A small silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, just real. She tilted her head. "You ever get tired of people pretending around you?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Every day." That night, Danielle returned home to find a notice taped to her door: "Rent due, final warning." Her brother was asleep on the couch, a textbook open on his chest. She ran her fingers through his hair, eyes burning. She couldn't lose this job now, not after everything. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Be careful who you think you can trust. Not everyone wants you here." Her stomach turned. She didn't need to guess who sent it. The next morning, June arrived early. Danielle was already there, going through reports. He paused at the door, watching her. "How long have you been here?" he asked. "Since 5. "Why?" "I couldn't sleep," she said simply. "Might as well make myself useful." He studied her, the quiet persistence, the unpolished dignity. It reminded him of something his father once said in broken English after they immigrated: "People like us must work twice as hard to be seen once." June sat down, loosening his tie. "You're not just useful, Danielle. You're right." She blinked. "About what?" About the world not being fair. About people pretending. About numbers not lying. It was the closest thing to an apology he'd ever given. She smiled faintly. I'm glad you see it. That afternoon, security called Danielle downstairs. Her supervisor, arms crossed, stood by the service entrance. You've been reassigned, she said curtly. You're making other staff uncomfortable. Uncomfortable how? You're not here to play accountant. Stay in your lane, or you'll be replaced. The words hit harder than she expected. She nodded slowly and turned away before they could see her tears. When June learned what had happened, he felt something unfamiliar, guilt. It crawled up his spine as he stared out the window at the falling snow. She had spoken truth to protect his empire, and now she was being punished for it. That evening, he called his assistant. Send a memo to HR, he said. Danielle Hayes is under my supervision for the remainder of the quarter. His assistant hesitated. Understood, sir. Should we? Just do it, June said. When he hung up, he realized how much she had changed the rhythm of his life, how her presence made him question the silence he used to live in. That night, he wrote a note he never sent. You remind me that integrity still exists in a world that forgets it. He folded the paper, tucked it into his desk, and turned off the lights. Some truths sting before they save. If you've ever been punished for doing the right thing, subscribe, not for the story, but for everyone who ever spoke up when it hurt. The resistance wasn't just in June's pride anymore, it was in the world around them, fighting the idea that kindness and honesty could belong in a place built on ambition. Neither of them knew it yet, but that resistance was only the beginning. The storm outside had turned the Chicago skyline into a blur of silver and white. Snow slammed against the glass walls of Park Global Tower, muffling the sounds of the city below. Inside, June Park's penthouse office glowed under the soft hum of lamplight, the only sign of life on an otherwise shut-down Friday evening. Danielle stood at the door, holding a stack of folders. You wanted these before morning, right? She asked. June looked up from his computer. His tie was loosened, his hair slightly disheveled, something she'd never seen before. You're still here. I don't leave until the job's done, she said simply. He motioned to the table. Then we might as well finish together. Her eyebrows lifted. Together? Yes. He gestured at the blizzard outside. Unless you'd rather walk home through that. Danielle glanced at the snow pelting the window and gave a small, reluctant smile. Guess not. She took off her gloves and sat across from him, spreading the papers between them. The city lights flickered against the glass like reflections of another world, one she didn't belong to, but one that, for some reason, kept pulling her in. For the first hour, they worked in silence. Only the scratching of pens and the rustle of paper filled the air. Every so often, June's gaze drifted toward Danielle, the way her lips pressed together when she concentrated, how she hummed softly when the silence grew too heavy. When she noticed, she chuckled. You keep looking like I'm about to make another billion-dollar catch. He smiled faintly. You might. Please, she said, shaking her head. I'm just trying to make sure no one else messes up decimals. Don't underestimate yourself, he said quietly. You saw what an entire team missed. She froze for a second, eyes meeting his. There was no arrogance in his tone, only sincerity. It was the first compliment she'd ever heard from him, and it landed heavier than she expected. Thank you, she said softly. As the hours dragged on, the power flickered. The storm outside howled like a living thing. Great, Danielle muttered. If the lights go out, we're trapped in a skyscraper. June smirked. You're afraid of the dark. I'm afraid of being stuck with a billionaire who doesn't believe in coffee breaks, she shot back. He actually laughed, a quiet, surprised sound that seemed to shock even him. Danielle looked up, half smiling. Did you just laugh? Barely, he said, straightening his tie. Don't get used to it. They ordered takeout from the only open restaurant downtown, cold pizza and instant noodles. Danielle couldn't help laughing when she saw him try to eat with chopsticks. For a man with private chefs, you're really struggling. I don't usually eat out of paper boxes, he said dryly. Then you've been missing out. She grinned, tossing him a fork. For a moment, the air shifted, less formal, more human. The sharp edges of status softened, replaced by something simpler, Two people, sharing bad pizza while snow piled against the windows. Around midnight, Danielle rubbed her temples. We've been staring at numbers for hours. My brain's officially mush. Then we'll take a break, June said, closing his laptop. She gave him a skeptical look. You know how to take a break. He leaned back in his chair. You'd be surprised. For a long moment, they sat in companionable silence. The storm outside had softened into a gentle drift. Danielle looked out over the city, the lights, the stillness. You ever wonder, she said quietly, how it feels to look at all this and actually belong up here? He followed her gaze. Every day. But belonging doesn't come with the view. She turned to him, surprised. What do you mean? He looked down at his hands. People think money gives you peace. It doesn't. It just buys better distractions. Danielle studied him, hearing something raw in his voice, not arrogance but exhaustion. Maybe peace isn't bought, she said. Maybe it's earned. In little ways. He smiled faintly. You really believe that? I have to, she said. It's all I've got. For a while, they said nothing. The hum of the heater filled the room, soft and steady. Then June stood, walked to a small cabinet, and pulled out a blanket. It's late. You can rest on the couch for a while. I'll finish the reports. She hesitated. You don't have to. I insist. So she sat on the couch, watching the snow fall outside. Before she knew it, her eyes grew heavy. Her head sank against the armrest. June turned from his desk to find her asleep, the faintest smile on her lips. For the first time in years, he saw peace. Not the kind you buy, but the kind that grows quietly in the presence of good people. He placed the blanket gently over her shoulders. Thank you, he whispered, though she couldn't hear him, for reminding me what honesty looks like. Outside, dawn began to edge across the horizon. By morning, the storm had cleared, and with it, something inside both of them. They didn't say it out loud, but the distance between a billionaire and a maid had narrowed, not through power, but through kindness. The storm had passed, but something softer lingered in the air, that quiet stillness after chaos, when truth feels close enough to touch. By Monday morning, the office was calm again. But inside June's penthouse workspace, two worlds were still shifting. Danielle stood by the window, sunlight spilling across the marble floor. She was reviewing the last stack of corrected documents when she noticed June's reflection behind her. He wasn't watching the papers, he was watching her. You fixed them all, he said. Guess we make a good team, she replied lightly, not turning around. He hesitated, then said, I owe you more than I've admitted. She smiled faintly. You already said thank you. No, he said quietly. That wasn't enough. Danielle turned, sensing something in his tone, a crack in the perfection he wore like armor. June walked to his desk, resting his hands on the edge. You ever wonder why I'm like this? Why I push people until they break? She crossed her arms gently. All the time. That earned a small weary smile. He looked past her, out the window, as if speaking to the skyline. My father was a shopkeeper back in Busan. Honest man. Too honest. He trusted a business partner who stole everything, wiped us out. We came to America with nothing. He worked nights, took odd jobs, tried to rebuild. But one day he didn't wake up. Danielle's voice softened. I'm sorry. June nodded slowly. That's when I decided I'd never depend on anyone again. Never give someone the power to hurt me. So I built walls, money, control, reputation. I thought that made me safe. And did it? She asked. He met her eyes, his expression raw. No. It made me alone. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, sacred, like truth landing after years of avoidance. Danielle looked down at the folder in her hands, tracing the edge of the paper. You're not the only one who lost someone because of money. He looked up. My mom was a nurse, she said. Worked double shifts, never complained. When she got sick, she didn't tell anyone because she didn't want us to worry. By the time we found out, the hospital bills were, she paused, swallowing hard. Let's just say honesty didn't save her, but lying would have destroyed her faster. June frowned. And your brother? Michael was only 10 when she passed. I promised her I'd get him through school. Every job I've taken since then, cleaning, accounting, whatever pays, has been for him. Her eyes glistened, but her voice stayed steady. That's why I couldn't stay quiet about your deal. I saw a family in those numbers, yours, mine, all the people who'd lose everything if it went wrong. June studied her in silence. For once, he didn't see a maid. He saw courage. Integrity. Someone who refused to surrender her soul, even when the world told her she didn't matter. You know, he said softly, you remind me of my father. Not because of what you do, but because you refuse to bend. Danielle smiled sadly. He sounds like a good man. He was, June said. And for the first time in years, I think he'd be proud of me, for listening. They sat down together, reviewing the last page of reports, but neither of them was really focused anymore. The air was different now, unguarded, honest, fragile in the best way. You ever wish you could go back? Danielle asked quietly. Every day, he said. But maybe the point isn't to go back. Maybe it's to find a way forward that means something. She nodded. Yeah. My mom used to say, life doesn't give refunds. Just lessons. They both laughed softly, a little surprised at how easily it came. As they worked, snowflakes began drifting again outside the window, small lazy spirals catching the light. The world felt slower, warmer, realer. For the first time, June didn't feel the pressure of perfection. He felt human. And for Danielle, the billionaire across from her wasn't just her boss anymore. He was proof that people could change when kindness was allowed in. Do you believe people can truly change once they face the truth about themselves? Comment below. Some people say character is fixed, others say redemption is always possible. What do you believe? If compassion has ever changed you, even once, don't just watch this. Subscribe. Not for me, but for every story that proves hearts can still turn around. That night, as Danielle packed her things, June stopped her at the door. You said you wanted to study accounting someday, right? Her eyes widened. How did you? I listen, he said, smiling faintly. When I'm not too busy pretending not to. She laughed quietly. Yeah, that sounds about right. He hesitated, then added, if I offered to pay for your classes, would you take it? She froze. I couldn't accept that. Why not? Because I don't want to owe anyone, she said gently. I just want to earn it. June nodded, respect flickering in his gaze. Then we'll find another way. That moment, small, wordless, felt like a turning point. A quiet understanding passed between them. Trust, not transaction. For June, kindness no longer felt like weakness. It felt like strength. For Danielle, being seen no longer felt like luck. It felt like justice. And for the first time, both of them sensed that the road ahead wasn't about contracts or titles. It was about learning how to rebuild their hearts. Winter lingered long in Chicago that year. The streets stayed dusted with frost, and the lake shimmered under a pale gray sky. Inside Park Global Tower, though, a different kind of thaw was happening. June Park wasn't the same man he'd been a month ago. His assistants whispered about how he smiled more, how the office didn't feel as tense, how he'd started walking to work instead of being chauffeured. The real change, though, wasn't in his schedule, it was in his heart. And it began every morning when Danielle Hayes walked into his office with a notebook, 2 coffees, and a quiet confidence that seemed to light the place. Morning, she said one day, handing him a cup. You know, I could get my own coffee, he replied, looking up from his screen. Yes, she said, smirking. But you never do. He shook his head, almost smiling. You're impossible. Efficient, she corrected. Their easy banter had become the heartbeat of his mornings. Somewhere between reports and late-night reviews, they'd fallen into rhythm, a kind of partnership neither had expected. Around midweek, June invited Danielle to accompany him to a client audit meeting downtown. You caught the error before, he explained. I trust your eyes more than anyone else's. Her mouth fell open slightly. You trust me? I said I trust your eyes, not your coffee choices, he teased. But when she smiled, wide, genuine, it hit him harder than he expected. He quickly looked away. The meeting was tense. Executives from a rival firm sat across the table, their tone sharp, their questions calculated. Danielle took notes quietly beside June, her pen moving fast. When one of the auditors misquoted a figure, Danielle spoke up, gently but clearly. "Excuse me, but that number doesn't match the internal summary." The room fell silent. June turned toward her, pride flickering in his gaze. "She's right. Check again." The auditor looked flustered, flipping pages, and finally nodded. "You're correct." Afterward, in the elevator, June said, "You know you terrified half the room, right?" "I was polite," Danielle said, shrugging. "And accurate." He laughed under his breath. "You remind me of my old mentor." "Let me guess, honest and underpaid?" "Exactly," he said, smiling. For the first time, they both laughed freely. No walls, no hierarchy, just two people finding comfort in truth. Later that week, snow turned to rain, and the city felt alive again. June's car was in the shop, so Danielle offered him a ride in her beat-up sedan. "You sure this thing is safe?" he asked, eyeing the cracked dashboard. "Safe-ish," she said, buckling her seatbelt. "You'll live." The radio played quietly, an old R&B song that made Danielle hum under her breath. June glanced at her. "You like this kind of music?" "It's what my mom used to play while cleaning," she said. Said it made the house feel like home. June smiled softly. "My mother liked trot songs. Old Korean love ballads. Drove me crazy as a kid, but now I'd give anything to hear her sing again." The car grew quiet, filled with a comfortable ache nostalgia, shared across two very different lives. When they reached her neighborhood, Danielle parked and looked at him. "You sure you'll be okay walking from here?" "I think I can handle 2 blocks, he said with a smirk. But before he stepped out, he hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "How do you stay kind?" She blinked. "What do you mean?" "I see what people say behind your back. How they treat you. Yet you still smile." Danielle looked out the window, watching kids chase each other through puddles. "Kindness isn't a reaction," she said. "It's a choice. If I wait for people to deserve it, I'll never give it." June stared at her for a moment, as if trying to memorize the sentence. "You know," he said quietly, "you might be the bravest person I've ever met." She laughed softly. "Then you need to meet more people." Back at his penthouse that night, June couldn't focus on his reports. Her words echoed in his mind. Kindness isn't a reaction, it's a choice. He looked around the massive apartment, the silent glass walls, the untouched piano, the framed awards. For the first time, it all felt hollow. He realized that every success had been about proving others wrong, not doing right by anyone. And somehow, a maid with nothing but integrity had reminded him what meaning looked like. The next day, Danielle found something unexpected waiting on her desk, a letter. "Ms. Hayes. You've shown me that leadership isn't about power, but perspective. I'd like you to join our accounting training program. It's paid. No conditions. JP." Her breath caught. She read it twice, then 3 times. It wasn't just an offer, it was belief. When she walked into his office later, letter in hand, she said softly, "You didn't have to do this." "I know," he said. "That's why I did." That night, as they stood by the window overlooking the city lights, Danielle said, "You know, Mr. Park, sometimes I think people come into our lives just to remind us what we forgot about ourselves." He nodded slowly. "Then I'm glad you walked into mine." It wasn't a grand moment, no music, no speeches, just 2 people standing side by side, no longer from different worlds, but from the same one. The morning started with tension heavy enough to taste. The office was quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that comes when something unseen is brewing. Danielle noticed it the second she stepped into the executive floor. Conversations stopped when she walked by. Heads turned. She tried to ignore it. She had a full schedule, audits to review, reports to organize, but the weight in the air followed her like a shadow. When she entered June's office, he wasn't at his desk. The blinds were half-drawn, papers scattered. She frowned. He was never messy. The phone on his desk buzzed. She glanced at the caller ID, Adam Roth. Before she could decide whether to answer, the door opened. June walked in, face pale, eyes sharp. "Don't touch that." Danielle froze. "I wasn't." Why is Roth calling my private line through your extension? I don't know. I just walked in. His gaze hardened. You've been going through restricted files, haven't you? Her jaw dropped. What? No. You gave me access for the audits. I gave you access to specific folders, he snapped. Not confidential acquisition data. Adam said you've been pulling files you weren't cleared to see. She stepped back, her pulse racing. You're listening to him? The same man who tried to push you into a bad deal. June's silence hurt more than any accusation. Danielle, he said finally, just tell me the truth. I am telling you the truth. Her voice cracked. You think I'd risk everything after what we've been through? He looked away. I don't know what to think anymore. The air in the room felt cold and brittle. Danielle stood there, disbelief flooding her chest. You really believe I'd betray you, she said quietly. I'm saying I need to confirm facts before I defend anyone, he said. Anyone, she repeated bitterly. That's all I am to you, huh? He flinched at her tone. You don't understand the stakes. No, she interrupted. You don't understand people. Not everything's about power, June. He stared at her, the sound of his first name from her mouth cutting through the tension like glass. Do you know what this job meant to me? She said. I worked my whole life to be seen as more than the help. And you, the one person I thought actually saw me, you're doing the same thing everyone else does. You're afraid to believe a maid could have integrity. June's jaw tightened. That's not fair. Neither is this, she said, tears glinting in her eyes. He wanted to speak, to say that it wasn't doubt, it was fear, that trusting anyone had always ended in loss. But the words refused to come. His pride clamped down where his heart wanted to reach out. Danielle turned toward the door. You know what hurts the most, she said softly. Not that you don't believe me, but that I believed in you. The door closed behind her with a quiet click that felt louder than any slammed one. For a long time, June didn't move. He stood by the window, watching the snow blur the city below. Inside his chest, something felt wrong, off balance, like a system losing power. He thought of his father again, of the night everything fell apart, of the betrayal that taught him to see trust as weakness. But hadn't Danielle done the opposite? Hadn't she earned it? He sank into his chair, hands pressed to his temples. What am I doing? He whispered. Downstairs, Danielle packed her things. The cleaning staff glanced at her, some curious, others relieved. Nobody stopped her. In the elevator, her reflection looked like a stranger, tired, humiliated, smaller somehow. She'd fought so hard to stand tall in this building, and now it felt like it was spitting her out. When she reached the lobby, she found Michael waiting outside in his hoodie, his backpack slung over one shoulder. Got your text, he said. You okay? She forced a smile. Yeah. Just tired. He frowned. You always say that when you're not. Her throat tightened. Let's just go home. Hours later, June drove aimlessly through the city, the windshield wipers squeaking against falling sleet. Every stoplight reflected memories. Danielle laughing over bad pizza, her steady voice defending him in meetings, the look in her eyes when she said she believed in him. He realized he'd become the very man he promised he'd never be, cold, distrustful, afraid of being wrong. He pulled over near the river, turning off the engine. For a long time, he just sat there, breath fogging the glass, guilt sinking in heavy and sharp. Finally, he pulled out his phone and stared at her contact. His thumb hovered over Cole. He didn't press it. Because pride, old familiar, poisonous pride, still had its grip. That night, Danielle sat at the kitchen table, bills spread out before her. Her brother was asleep in the next room, the apartment silent except for the ticking of the wall clock. She ran a hand over her face, exhausted. You did the right thing, she whispered to herself. You told the truth. But even truth didn't always protect you. Sometimes, it just left you standing in the wreckage, waiting for someone else to remember who you really were. Meanwhile, June sat alone in his penthouse, the city's lights flickering beyond the glass. On his desk lay the folder she'd last touched, still open to the corrected figures, her handwriting marking every line she'd saved him from losing. He rested his hand on the paper and closed his eyes. Danielle, he murmured, voice barely audible, I'm sorry. Outside, The snow began to fall again, slow, steady cleansing. But inside both of them, the storm had only just begun. 2 days passed. The city thawed under an early hint of spring, but for June Park, everything still felt frozen. His office was quieter than ever. Danielle's absence left a silence he couldn't fill. Her coffee cup was still on the corner of his desk, the one she'd used every morning. He hadn't thrown it away. He couldn't. Work felt mechanical again, like old times, cold, efficient, empty. But the old rhythm no longer fit. Every time he signed a document, he thought of the day she'd shouted, "Sir, stop," and saved him from disaster. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd been rescued once by her honesty, and now he'd broken it himself. He sighed, leaning back in his chair. This isn't who I want to be anymore. Meanwhile, across town, Danielle was folding laundry when her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello. Ms. Hayes." It was June's assistant, her voice cautious. "Mr. Park asked me to call. He'd like to meet, in person if you're willing." Danielle froze. For a moment, she considered hanging up. Then she thought about everything her mother had taught her, about second chances and grace. "Tell him I'll come," she said quietly. That afternoon, Danielle walked into Park Global for the first time since the fallout. Security gave her a nervous glance but didn't stop her. She took the elevator to the top floor, heart pounding. The doors opened. June was waiting near the window, his suit jacket off, the skyline gleaming behind him. For a long moment, neither spoke. "You came," he said finally. "Your assistant called," she said simply. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either." He gestured to the seat across from him, but she didn't move. "You can say what you need to say from there." He nodded slowly. "Fair enough." For a moment, he struggled for words. June Park, the man who could negotiate billion-dollar contracts with calm precision, suddenly couldn't find a single sentence that felt right. "Danielle, I owe you an apology." Her expression didn't change. "You already said that once." "Not like this." He took a deep breath. "I was wrong. About everything. About trust. About what makes someone worth believing. You saved my company, and I repaid you with doubt. That's not who I want to be." He stepped closer, his voice quiet. "You told me once that kindness is a choice. I didn't understand that until now. I thought strength came from control. But it doesn't. It comes from humility, from being brave enough to say you were wrong." Danielle's eyes softened, but her guard was still up. "You can't just erase what happened, June." "I know," he said. "I don't want to erase it. I want to learn from it." The room fell silent again, filled only by the hum of the city below. She looked at him for a long time, searching his face for the man she thought she knew, and for the first time, she saw something real there. No arrogance. No armor. Just sincerity. "I didn't come here for an apology," she said finally. "I came because I wanted to see if you meant it." "I do," he said. "Then prove it," she said softly. June walked to his desk, pulled out a folder, and handed it to her. She opened it, scanning the first page. Her eyes widened. It was a scholarship program, the Hayes Fund for Integrity in Business. Her name, printed in bold letters. "What is this?" "It's a fund for underprivileged students who want to study accounting, finance, or business ethics. In honor of your mother, and you." Danielle's voice caught. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he said. "It's the least I can do." Tears welled in her eyes. "You think a fund fixes what happened?" He shook his head. "No. But maybe it starts something better." For the first time in weeks, Danielle smiled, small, hesitant, but real. "You really have changed," she said quietly. "I'm trying," he replied. "Turns out it's harder than signing contracts." She laughed softly. "Yeah. People don't come with clean lines and signatures." He nodded, smiling back. "No, they don't. But they're worth it." They stood by the window again, just like before, the city stretching out beneath them, bright, alive, and full of second chances. "Thank you," June said quietly. "For saving my company. For saving me, even when I didn't deserve it." Danielle shook her head. You saved yourself. I just reminded you how. For the first time, there was peace between them, not the forced kind, but the kind that grows out of forgiveness freely given. If someone who hurt you finally owned their mistake, could you forgive them, even if it took everything in you to do it? Comment below. Your stories of forgiveness might help someone else choose it too. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that change is possible, subscribe. Not for me, but for every real person still learning to choose kindness over pride. That evening, as Danielle walked out of the tower, snow began to fall again, slow, quiet, gentle. She looked up at the sky, letting a single flake melt on her cheek. Sometimes, forgiveness didn't come with fanfare. Sometimes it was just a breath, a step, a moment of peace after too much noise. And somewhere high above, June Park watched her go, a faint smile breaking across his face. Not triumph. Not relief. Something better. Grace. A year later, spring returned to Chicago. The air was warmer, the lake shimmered again, and the Park Global Tower gleamed brighter than ever. But the biggest change wasn't in the skyline. It was in the people inside it. June Park stood on the top floor, overlooking the city he once ruled through fear. These days, the office felt different. His desk wasn't spotless anymore. A small plant sat by the window, next to a photo of a smiling woman shaking his hand. Danielle Hayes, in her graduation cap and gown. The caption below the frame read, "Integrity first. Always." He still remembered that day clearly, the one that had rewritten his life. Danielle had graduated with her degree in accounting, the first scholarship recipient of the Hayes Fund for Integrity in Business. When he'd handed her the diploma, she'd said, "Guess I finally earned it, huh?" And he'd smiled, not the polite kind he used to give in meetings, but a real one. You always had. The rest of the world just needed to catch up. Today, the company's headquarters buzzed with excitement. It was the first anniversary of the Integrity Fund, and students from across the country were arriving to present their projects on ethical leadership. June adjusted his tie, took a deep breath, and headed downstairs to the auditorium. Danielle stood near the stage, checking notes on a clipboard. She wore a sleek gray blazer, confident, professional, but still the same woman who'd once shouted, "Sir, stop," in a room full of executives. When she saw June, her face lit up. "Didn't think you'd actually come down here. You usually hide behind glass walls." He chuckled. "Old habits die hard." "Well," she said teasingly, "good thing you've learned a few new ones." He grinned. "Good thing you taught me." The ceremony began. Students shared stories about standing up to unfair bosses, uncovering accounting errors, and defending honesty even when it cost them jobs. Each one echoed the story that had started it all, a simple act of kindness that changed the course of a company. When it was June's turn to speak, the room quieted. He stood at the podium, fingers resting on the edge, his voice calm but full of weight. "I used to think leadership was about control," he began. "About being the smartest, the most prepared, the most untouchable person in the room. But a year ago, someone taught me something different. She taught me that leadership isn't about power, it's about courage. The courage to be kind, even when the world tells you not to be." He glanced toward Danielle. She smiled, eyes glistening. "She reminded me that truth doesn't care about titles," he continued. "It can come from anywhere, even from the person everyone overlooks. Especially from them." A quiet murmur spread through the audience, respect, admiration, understanding. June finished, voice steady. "The Hayes Fund isn't just about scholarships. It's about remembering that integrity still matters, in business, in life, and in every choice we make when no one's watching." The crowd erupted in applause. Danielle wiped at her eyes. Afterward, as the students mingled, Danielle walked up beside him. "You're getting better at speeches." He laughed softly. "Still terrified every time." "That's good," she said. "Means you still care." For a while, they stood together, watching the students talk excitedly about their projects. The air felt light, hopeful, the kind of hope that didn't shout, but hummed quietly beneath everything. "You ever think about how crazy this all is?" Danielle asked. "A billionaire and a maid running an ethics program together?" He smiled. "It's not crazy. It's poetic." Later that evening, the building emptied out. The city glowed below them again, just as it had the night they first met, when fear and pride ruled everything. Now, peace filled the silence. Danielle turned to him. You ever miss the old days? June looked out at the skyline and shook his head. Not for a second. You sure? Less paperwork, fewer emotional speeches. More loneliness, he said softly. She nodded. Fair point. They laughed, not because anything was funny, but because laughter had become their way of acknowledging how far they'd come. As she gathered her things, June said, Hey Danielle. Yeah. Thank you. She smiled. You already thanked me. Then let me thank you again, for not giving up on me when I gave up on myself. Her eyes softened. You just needed a reminder that people can change. The world needs more of those. He nodded. Then let's keep giving them. Outside, dusk melted into night. The city lights reflected off the river, shimmering like stars scattered across the water. Danielle walked home beneath the soft glow of street lamps, her breath clouding in the cool air. She passed by a bakery where a stranger dropped $1, and without thinking she bent down, picked it up, and handed it back with a smile. Thank you, the woman said. Danielle just nodded. It's nothing. But she knew better. Kindness is never nothing. In his office high above, June looked out the window one last time. The lights below flickered like tiny acts of grace, each one a reminder that change doesn't start with grand gestures, but small, quiet choices. He lifted the photo of Danielle's graduation, smiled, and whispered she was right. Then he turned off the light, letting the city's glow fill the room. If this story reminded you that kindness can rewrite even the hardest hearts, don't just leave. Subscribe. Because maybe the next story that finds you will be the one that changes something too. Thank you for staying with this story to the very end. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you'll not miss out on the next video.